All right, hello everyone and welcome to our webinar in which we're going to be chatting about the Legal Content Marketing Report. So this is a report that we've done based on the content marketing and social media habits of the top 100 UK law firms in 2015, and we did a similar report in 2014, so we've got some really interesting figures to share which show the progress that has been made and any particular shifts in behaviour. So what we're going to do today is that first we're going to chat about the headlines, really, like the main stats. Then we're going to talk about why they're important and then how to do content marketing and social media better. So let me just go on to the next slide. So who are we? So I'm Claire Trevian and I'm the Head of Content Marketing at Passle, and with me is my colleague.
I'm Chris Grant. Hello everyone. Sales Director at Passle with a fabulous photo up there. Yes.
Need to work on those, I think, get slightly better ones, but that's not the important thing, obviously, this time. Yeah, so without further ado, we're going to plunge straight into the summary of research that was conducted at the end of 2015. So I'm just going to start by chatting about the content produced in 2015. So firstly, there was a 77% increase in content being created, so which just goes to show that law firms are obviously taking content a lot more seriously. And when I talk about content, I'm talking about things like blogs and insight pieces and articles. I'm not talking about news or about people talking about their charity bike ride and things like that, things that are actually sort of relevant and useful to people. 90% of the firms in total increased their output, and I really like this last stat that 36% of the firms actually doubled their output. So they really went for it. They suddenly realized that content marketing works and that it's worth doing. However, it's not all good news. So 46,866 pieces of content were created that year by all of those top 100 UK law firms, but that actually only amounts to 128 pieces of content a day, which is basically 0.75 pieces of content per lawyer per year, which actually really isn't that much. And it just goes to show that, you know, law firms are not making the most of their experts. I have a stat here actually that's quite good, I think, which says that content marketing costs 62% less than traditional marketing, and it generates about 3 times as many leads. So it's definitely something that's worth considering, and if your law firm isn't using it, then you're really missing a trick. However, on more good news, that's still better than the accountants who have created 0.29 pieces per accountant per year in 2015. So that's the good news. So now Chris is going to...
Absolutely. Well, just a little bit on Twitter and clout. And clout, for everyone knows what Twitter is. Clout, for those that are perhaps not familiar with it, is a way of measuring your online influence. Clout basically aggregates and looks at your Twitter feed, your LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, basically everywhere you are online, and is able to basically give you a number out of 100, which gives you an idea of your online influence. And just to put it in context, looking earlier today, mine was 48 and Claire's is 60. So Claire's winning. I think the really exciting thing though is that Twitter usage has actually jumped fairly massively. It's up to 66, well, it's increased by 66%. I know that there are still at least 6 firms in the top 200 law firms that aren't actually using Twitter at all. I think probably the main thing is trying to work out what they're going to do with it. But it's exciting that the daily reach of a firm has jumped up to approximately 672 people. So law firms are actually developing these touch points and I suppose starting to be where people are actually. Average number of followers for a firm, 3,773, which is kind of all right, isn't it?
Respectable.
Again, if you look at Claire, she's got over 3,000 herself, so that, I suppose, just puts it a little bit into perspective. And I think the average clout scores increased to 42, which again, to put it in perspective, if you look at Claire's clout score of 60, is not great.
It was 40 last year. I forgot to put that on the slide, sorry.
So a little bit of an increase, but essentially what it does show is that that there is a general sort of uplift and a general uptake, and just I think some of the firms are just starting to realise the importance of actually doing this. I think the unfortunate stat for the legal community is that unfortunately accountants are actually winning in this respect and tweeting just a little bit more. So yeah, maybe a little bit of game upping to do.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know what you think, Claire. I think overall it's kind of with the content and the Twitter. I think because firms have got more content, then they've got more reason to use Twitter.
I think often law firms, when they think of social media, they just jump straight into LinkedIn. They think that's the go-to one. But actually, are all of their clients going to be on LinkedIn? Probably not. And are they going to be able to find new clients and new leads on LinkedIn? Well, maybe. But to neglect Twitter is to neglect lots of opportunities, because obviously Twitter is completely egalitarian. You don't need to be connected to somebody to see what they're sharing, what they're creating. You know, there's no difference really on Twitter between a celebrity and a law firm and your average Joe Blogs, which is great. And I was telling Chris about this as well earlier today. We were talking about the Twitter search engine and what a wonderful thing it is, which people don't use enough, I don't think, but it's a great way to be able to find useful content. And when you're searching for anything, to be honest, Twitter is my go-to when it comes to things like news. I want to go on it to find out who's talking about it before newspapers are. And if I was going to look for a lawyer or an accountant, it would probably be my first place to go as well. Yeah.
And I think it's I think the stats that Twitter's actually the third most used search engine in the world at the moment. Not only that, the things that you tweet will come up on Google results as well. So you're by not doing this, you're kind of handicapping yourself, regardless of your sector, really.
Yeah, definitely. It's all worth doing. So now we're going to have a little chat about why it's important. I think we've covered that a little bit, but we're going to go a little bit more in depth onto why it's important to have a good content marketing strategy and a good social media strategy. So.
I know this is one of my favourite bugbears. This whole concept of differentiation, and I think that the illustration, what might illustrate it quite nicely, is the idea that if you need a lawyer to do some work for you, odds are you're going to take to Google. Most people will take to Google to start looking. Even if you get a word of mouth referral, you're still going to look up that particular person, and you might narrow your field down to 2 lawyers. Probably if they're both working in the same field and they're both people you're likely to possibly hire. They both have very similar education. They've done the same degrees. They probably went to similar universities, probably even similar extracurricular activities. They've all got a similar listing in the Legal 500 or whatever other directory they're using. And essentially it's very, very difficult to tell the difference between the two of them. And what really can act as a differentiator is when you Google them and you find that the first lawyer has not done anything. You find their name, you find what they write about themselves on LinkedIn, essentially a CV. But with the second lawyer, you might find that on a weekly basis, they actually answer questions that you might have. I think it's a real no-brainer who you're going to choose in that situation. And I think likewise with firms. I did an exercise where I took the top 5 global law firms and I took the main headline little bit that they say about them, and I stripped away the names and the branding, and essentially they're all multinational, they're all experts in their fields, they all care about their clients, etc., etc. And I think if you gave those descriptions back to the people that read them, they probably wouldn't know which firm they were referring to.
Yeah, not quite as different as they like to think it is. This is a great stat, which goes a little bit into what we were talking about Twitter earlier as well, that 85% of B2B buyers use social media as a part of the purchasing process. So exactly as you were saying, people are researching their lawyers and so forth, and part of that will involve social media as well as any blogs that you're writing. So it's something you've got to really take into consideration.
I think it also goes down to choice. That 20 years ago, there was a lot less choice. There were less of everything. There were less lawyers. There were less shops. Now you've got a huge pool to choose from. So it's really, really important that as a firm you stand out as being slightly different, and you use that differentiator of your people. And I think when people are actually using social media and researching, then you're the firm that they're going to choose.
Yeah, oh, completely. I wanted to just share this image because I think it's quite brilliant, actually. It's Google Trends, basically. It shows the number of times a particular search term has been typed in. And as you can see, lawyer is completely trouncing law firm. And I've looked at this as well in other areas such as accountants. And again, accountant was trumping accounting firm anytime, which I think really goes to show people are looking for an individual, even there with quite a vague sort of generic term like lawyer. They're going to go for that more than a law firm. People buy people. It's a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason because it's true. You're gonna trust an individual and a person, and not just a generic corporate law firm that sounds exactly the same as every other generic corporate law firm, really. And this is an image that I absolutely adore. First, the stat that 80% of legal traffic is to biographies. And I mean, we've all seen this. We've all seen terrible lawyer biographies where you feel sort of drowned by jargon and by cleverness and show-offery. It's a very technical term, that. But that's not what you're looking for. If you're looking to give somebody a lot of your money to solve a problem for you, you're not particularly interested in what other lawyers think about that particular person. You want to find out if, as it puts on the right-hand side, are you an asshole? And what kind of work are you really good at? And again, links to blog posts. You want to see an active demonstration that you are exactly the right fit for that problem. And going for a very generic, bland, usual biography is not going to do that. You've got to actually demonstrate your expertise. Yeah.
No, I totally agree. I think it's really, really important. Yeah, address and phone number, but really just showing you know what you're talking about. And not only showing you know what you're talking about, but showing you know what you're talking about in language that actually makes sense to the people that you're talking to. You know, because I think no matter what area you're working in, your clients are not, you know, they might, unless they're in-house counsel, but even then, you know, the majority of people that are looking for your services, they want you to solve a problem and they're not really that interested in the nitty-gritty. They just want to know that you've got the expertise they need, and if you can demonstrate that on a regular basis, then, you know, and you have that on your lawyer bio, then you're actually answering the questions that are being asked here by the potential clients.
Completely. So, I mean, that all sounds, you know, good and jolly, but like, how do you actually do this better in practice? So we're going to just share with you a couple of tips that we think would really help your law firm to improve on those fronts.
Well, I think this first one, and it is kind of a buzzword at the moment. I think employee advocacy as well as employee amplification is a really important thing. And I think I found some stats the other day, which not surprisingly said that that customers, people, the general public, are far more likely to be interested and to trust something that's said by an employee of a company rather than that company's PR or marketing, or indeed even that company's chief exec. And I think this is where you need to start finding a way to empower your team to, I suppose, both create but also to share your content.
Completely. You've just got to have some guidelines, basically, to encourage your employees to use social media to share the content. And they've got to be useful guidelines, but not restrictive or over-restrictive ones. You know, you were telling me earlier as well about how some law firms have pages and pages of documents about what you can do, what you can't do, and so forth. And these are just barriers that are going to really stop people from commenting and sharing the content in a reactive and natural way. I mean, social media and blogging are very fast-paced, really, and if you miss the boat of a particular moment, then there's almost no point in doing it, really. So you've got to sort of have a policy that makes it really easy for your experts to share this and know that they're not going to just be penalised for doing so.
I think there was an example of an Australian bank that recently got a lot of press, bad press, because they had a particularly appalling restrictive social media policy, and it basically said, you know, dear employee, if any of your friends happen to say something bad about the bank, then the onus is on you to deal with that, sort it out, or you're going through a disciplinary process. And that sort of thing just absolutely nips it in the bud. Nobody's going to share your content, and nobody's going to create it. Nobody's going to talk about you on social media because essentially they're terrified of,
yes.
of any potential consequences. And I think also the thing about empowering your team, that you have a team, you're going to have people that with the right sort of work and with the right help actually will write and create the content that you want them to. Not everyone is going to, but if you can get everybody in a team to share it, so if Claire writes a piece of content, her LinkedIn connections, 500 people will potentially see that. But if Claire then sends that piece of content around the rest of us and we all share it, then suddenly you're up to 10, 15, 20,000 people that are seeing it. And there's a huge amount of value in that, because LinkedIn, for example, when people log in and they see your piece of content, your thought leadership, your insights on a regular basis, then they start to consider that you're an expert in your particular area.
If we're talking just about money as well, which I know matters to a lot of people, it's an incredibly cheap way as well to sort of share your expertise and share your law firm's message in many ways, because you're extending that reach organically. You're not paying to share stuff, which often, quite a few social media networks, especially if you're only publishing things through a company page, it's very much a pay-to-play sort of situation, and most people aren't going to see it. Whereas if it's shared on a personal page, like your personal Facebook page or your personal LinkedIn page, there's a lot more room there for people to see it. It's more likely to turn up in the feed. There's a lot of things you can't do on LinkedIn, for instance. If you're just a company page, you can't create a pulse post, for instance, which has enormous value. So it's definitely worth doing that thing. And I think the other thing as well that's important is for firms to allow their employees to have their personality and to bring their whole self to both sharing and creating that content. So that's why I think that you've got to be a bit careful with the guidelines, in that you don't want everybody to sound like a corporate robot, basically, and they've got to put their own twist on it.
I think there's also the other fringe benefit is that when your team, your lawyers, your associates, whoever it is, are actually regularly creating and sharing content that has personality, and actually that also helps with when you're trying to recruit new people, because people are seeing you regularly, they see that you have an open culture, and they see that you're actually somewhere that's probably quite interesting to work, as well as the fact that you're regularly demonstrating your expertise, and that's very compelling when you're trying to choose between a couple of firms that you might want to work for.
Yeah, completely. Okay, so just moving on to the next point, which is about actually really the creating of the content. I wanted to share this example, which I absolutely adore. It's by this chap called Josh Heyman, and he isn't a lawyer or anything like that, but he is the owner of a B2B company. And I wanted to share it because he was struggling with creating content, in that he kept on trying to do fashionable, clickbaity sort of content, and it wasn't really working. And then he actually listened to the question that one of his prospective customers asked, which was, how do I make one of these personality quizzes I see on Facebook? And he thought for a while that it was a bit of a boring thing and nobody would be interested. But he did it, and he landed his first paying customer through that article. So you might think, okay, that's a pretty boring thing for the general public, but for his niche, sort of specific customer, it was absolutely the perfect thing to do. And I think this can apply really well to law firms. Like, I think sometimes some lawyers get a little bit carried away talking in a very jargony way about a very niche change in the law, but that's not necessarily what's going to make people find them or want to hire them, really. Whereas solving a problem for them or explaining something that's really complex in simple terms is much more likely to do that, because if you're looking for a solution, you've got some kind of legal problem, and you find this blog post that explains it to you, not only are you feeling this lovely gratitude for this person who's written it, but when it comes to actually hiring somebody and spending money, who are you most likely to turn to? You know, the person that's actually sort of explained it to you in ways you can understand, or some random other lawyer? I would think it would be the person that had explained it, to be honest.
And I think we had a great example of this earlier this week when one of my clients, who's a lawyer, was actually wrote an article about taking your kids out of school during term time. Which is something that she deals with on a regular basis, and she was talking about where to share it, and ended up actually sharing it on Facebook. And she popped her article up, and 350 people read it really quite quickly. Actually clicked through from Facebook onto her blog and read her content. And she was saying, "Well, that's incredible. Why? But I think it was actually because lots of people are interested and have that question, can I take my kids out of school to go on holiday because it's a lot cheaper? And what are the legal consequences? How can I get away with it? And I know that that particular lawyer, having put that article out there, if I was looking at that particular problem, then she would be the first person I'd get in touch with. Because she explained that particular problem really nicely, which was a question that the potential clients were asking her.
Yeah, and I think that also highlights that this content marketing strategy is really a long-term one. I mean, they might not immediately need somebody to solve their legal problem to do with their children or whatever, but this is the kind of stuff that's going to stay in your mind, and further down the line, it's going to be much more likely to get the goodwill. So with that post I just showed you of Josh Heyman, I just want to sort of conclude about it, that it is basically a post that's written by an expert about his subject expertise, in which he answers a question asked by his target audience. Can't get better than that, really. That's really the aim of your content, and so few law firms are actually doing this, that by doing it you will really differentiate yourself.
Yeah, and I think also we've talked a lot around, and before we get to questions, I think just worth mentioning, we've talked a lot around getting your experts to create content, and I know probably several of you are going, yes, I know we want to get the experts to create content, but they won't do it. And I think there are a couple of things that can help, and we'll actually be covering this in a lot more depth in another webinar over the next month or so, basically on actually driving engagement for your experts. But I think we've had a question which is relevant to this one.
We've got two really interesting questions that come through, and if you think of any others, feel free to put them into the box. So the first one is, how aware are most law firm partners of content marketing?
And I wanted to sort of slip that question in at this point because I think it's very relevant to how to engage your experts. And I think from my point of view, and I talk to a lot of lawyers and a lot of marketers at law firms, that actually, no, not a lot of partners are really aware of content marketing in the same way that they're not aware of conversion metrics or click-through stats or anything like that. And I think for me the first and biggest takeaway here is actually that what we have to do is start speaking their language. We don't talk to our expert in corporate law on content marketing because they're just not interested. They couldn't give a monkey's. What they are interested in is an interview with a journalist, being perceived as being a leader in their field, listed as in a top 10 list, asked to sit on a panel, and those are all the sort of results that they will get by regularly demonstrating their expertise. And I think that's a real key takeaway, that we have to find a way to actually speak the language that we as people in marketing, convert the language that we as people in marketing into language that a partner in law firms are actually going to understand, the sort of what's in it for me factor.
Yeah, with incentives that work for them, again, because I think a lot of the time they're like, oh, marketing wants me to do a blog, or something like that, but they don't actually see the end value in doing that. They don't understand the end game, so it's definitely important to really explain those things, as you said.
And I think just as a follow-up, and like I said, we'll cover this in more depth in a future webinar, but the other follow-up is feedback, and I think the analogy here is if you imagine you've gone to the bowling alley to go 10-pin bowling, and you're going for your first round, and you're cradling the ball, you run up, you let go of the ball, and just before it hits the pins, a big blank screen comes down and you don't see what happens. how likely are you to continue? So when you finally get the senior partner to write a piece of content, you need to be feeding back to him or her, how many people are reading it, where it's being shared, what results have you got, has somebody contacted the firm as a result of it?
It's all a process, and going back a little bit to what I was talking about with the creating content that solves the problem of your customer. Again, it's a sort of trial and error situation to find out how that might be. It's not going to manifest itself in the same way for every law firm and for every pool of clients, and the only way you can really find that out is by testing and trying and creating enough content that you've got data to base any decision on, really, any conclusions on. So quickly, we've got another question as well that's come through, which is saying, why don't law firms seem to embrace social media? I think we've covered that a little bit as well earlier in sort of saying, I think there's a little bit of a fear about it. There's also maybe some law firms still discourage their employees from using social media because I think they're just worried about what might happen. It's sort of a scary world that they're somehow not comfortable or familiar with.
And I think in some cases rightly so, because obviously you can't, as a lawyer, you can't start mentioning clients or saying the wrong thing. But I think just adding that one line to a Twitter profile that says views on my own can be quite liberating. But also just having a plan, actually sitting down and drawing some guidelines. Who are we? What do we talk about? What are our clients interested in? And just sticking to those topics, staying away from the controversy. Give a comment on the latest judgment, something helpful. Comment on what's going on in the news. The hot topic at the moment is Brexit. Give some helpful answers about that. But I think there is some fear there, and I think in some cases it is justified. But I think that there has to be that time when you just let your people.
It's got to be. I mean, it's got to come to a point now where it's no longer treated like this new shiny thing. It's over 10 years old, like most of the social media networks are at this point. They're not the new shiny kid on the block. They're normal, basically. And if you're not part of it, then you're quite old-fashioned, really, or that's how you're perceived.
That's how you're
if you go onto a law firm website and you do not see any links to any social media network, then you're wondering, well, what kind of age are they living in? How out of touch are they with everything else? And it doesn't have to be, scary and over the top, any of these Twitter accounts, but they have to be monitored. There's got to be somebody there ready to answer any questions that come through on them, for instance, which I think often, I think it was eConsultancy that had a look at some of the law firms' Twitter accounts, and you noticed that some of them hardly ever replied, and when they had events, they didn't make the most of it. They didn't sort of share pictures, get engaged with hashtags or anything like that. They were very, very, very dry. They would just share the newsletter with just the title newsletter, and that was it, like nothing to make people want to engage with it. And at that point, you might as well not have a Twitter or a social media account if you're not going to do something.
If you're not going to do something, especially Twitter, if you're not going to use it, don't have it. I think that's a really quite important point. And if you do have it, then use it, share your expertise.
Just make it part of your normal routine, really. Sorry. Okay, so I think that's pretty much what we've got time for, but our emails are on the screen. That's our Twitter account and our LinkedIn page, so do come and say hi if you've got any further questions.
Yeah, and any feedback, any topics you'd like us to cover in the future, like I said, we'll do something about engaging the experts, because I think that's a real hot topic and one that I get asked about a lot. But yeah, for me, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye.